see that the three of you have done those 3 slides. I'm going to share my screen because we're going to talk about everything that just happened as you were doing those 3. So if you still want to have those up to refer back to it to remember what happened on each slide. On the first one, so on the first question, what do you notice happened when you did that?
In the prompt, there was something already filled in to start your response.
Right, that's exactly what happened. So if we go back to take a look at that one, so on the first one, when you picked summer, it said, summer is my favorite season because. If you had chosen winter, it would say, winter is my favorite season because. So what I want to show you is how to make a sentence starter show up for students so that you can help them begin their sentence, because we all know that sometimes students really struggle with, how do I actually start saying what I want to say so that it makes sense? So in this one, also, if you notice when you have these different pieces or these different components, if there's nothing, no color here, there's no computation layer in there. But if you notice it's green, that's where the computation layer is. So on this one, students were asked to explain their answer. And what I did is I started it for them. So one thing that we have to make sure we do is when you're using one of these components, go ahead and give it a label, because sometimes you have to refer back to this label. So I labeled this as multiple choice 1, and everyone has their own way of naming stuff. I usually do it based on the component and the slide that it's on, because it helps me keep up with where things are. So this is my multiple choice question on slide 1. So my computation layer in here. So right now everything's grayed out, and why I did this is because if something is grayed out, it has this little hashtag or pound sign in front of it, because that's just telling you a message. It doesn't actually do any of the coding. So where you can tell when there's coding is based on some of the stuff that I'm going to go over. So on this one, what I did is I gave a sentence starter, and for this to happen, to give students a sentence starter, you use initial text, and that's the Desmos code for it. So right here it says hashtag initial text. I'm going to get rid of this little hashtag symbol because now it's bolded like this. So the initial text, that's going to be the sentence starter that I'm going to give them. All right, now, if you notice, depending on the multiple choice answer that they chose, there was a different starter. So you have to remember what you did for everything. So whenever we're doing something where text is going to be given to them, we're going to have a bunch of when statements, and then it also has to end with otherwise. So even though this is all right here, I'm going to type it again underneath this so you can see what happens when I start typing. So the reason why I have these when statements here is because every time a multiple choice option is chosen, something is going to happen. So when, and then as you see right here, I use the word this, because this is talking about this specific component. I could have said multiple choice 1, like how I named it, but in this case it doesn't matter because I'm typing within the component. So I'm going to do it this way just so you can see that either one would work. So when multiple choice 1, and then when I hit the little dot, all of these options pop up. So you don't really have to memorize things that are happening. There's only certain things you can do based on whatever it is you're trying to do. So I'm going to hit is selected, and then this little parenthesis pops up because I have to specify what choice I'm talking about. So I had those 4 choices, so it's choice 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. So when the first multiple choice is selected, that was when a kid chose that winter was their favorite season. So I have to put a quotation mark to start my sentence. So you see how I have these emojis in here too? You don't have to do that, but if you want to, if you right click and hit emoji, you can like pick all of these random things. So whatever, I'm just going to choose that for now. And then I would say winter is my favorite season because, and then I need to end with a quotation mark. And then you'll notice this little warning symbol is there, because anytime you say when a certain thing happens, you always have to end that with otherwise. It doesn't when statements you do. You could say one when statement, you could have 10 when statements, but in the end, you have to end with otherwise. So now I want to talk about my second multiple choice option. So when MC1, because it was from that component, is selected, option 2, I can say whatever it is I wanted to say, and I can keep on going for each multiple choice option. So for otherwise, this always has to be here. And if you notice, I did a quotation mark, nothing inside, and a quotation mark. The only time we would put something in there is fall was this random stuff that I put in here. All right, so do you guys have any questions about that before I go on to the next thing?
Could you, if you wanted like a multi-sentence answer and you wanted to start each sentence for them, could you put like 3 different sentence starters with enters in between them, or is that not something you can do?
Yeah, you definitely can do that. And that's also a great question, because sometimes you might want to leave space, and when you hit enter in between the quotation marks, that represents an extra space that will show up in whatever component you're in. So let's say you didn't want this to be written on the first line. Let's say you wanted a space and then you wanted that to show up. I can come right here and hit enter, and that should now show up with an extra line. And then I could say, okay, I'm going to say enter, enter, another reason is my favorite, ... So now if I go here and I preview it, I'm going to choose winter because that's the one I worked on. Now there's that extra space. Here's one sentence starter. Here's another one. So yeah, you can put as many sentence starters as you want.
Awesome.
All right, now let's say, so like when I preview this and I look at it, this says explain your thinking, and then you gave a sentence starter. If you wanted to, you could change what this says and then still leave this blank. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to duplicate this because I want to use the same question, I want to use the same choices, but what I want to change is maybe I want to change, so I'm going to get rid of all this because I don't need this anymore. Instead of giving them a sentence starter, I want to change what that question is, and so that's called an explain prompt. So if I type, and I just started typing E and this came up, so explain prompt, maybe I want to say, why was this your favorite season? And since I didn't have any when statements, because this wasn't based on a choice that they chose, this is just in general, this is what I wanted to say. Now I can preview this, choose your favorite season. Why was this your favorite season? So you don't have to stick to Desmos's like pre-made explanation. You can change what you want that prompt to say. All right, then we did this one. So if you forgot, when we did this one, what happened? Do you remember?
It gave an explanation. It told you you were correct, and then it gave an explanation.
Okay, so if you were correct, it told you that and it gave an explanation. Did anybody notice anything else that happened?
Mine had a double explanation.
Yours had a double explanation.
I think that was just a
11
typo.
is not divisible by 2 is not divisible by 2.
Oh, then that was my bad for how I typed it in. But there's something else that happened. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened. So I chose 2. Did anybody see what happened?
So it tells you if you're wrong also.
Right, so I gave you a message based on what you chose.
Mm-hmm.
Can I change my answer?
No.
So I made it happen so that when a student chose their answer, they saw if they were correct, they saw the reason, but now they can't change their answer.
Mm.
So there are a few pieces to this, so let me show you how this one worked. So we had a note in there because I said which of the following is an odd number. Then I gave them options to choose from, and you notice there's computation layer in there. but then there's a third piece now. There's another note, but there isn't actually anything in here because it's in the computation layer. So this is also something to pay attention to if you're editing pre-made activities. Sometimes there's a note and there's something written in here, but there's also a computation layer. 99% of the time, if this is green and there's something here, you're not actually seeing this. Everything's coming from in the computation layer, but this one's fine because there's nothing used. All right, so first I want to talk about the message that was given because this is very similar to what happened on the previous slide. So you had 4 choices, and this was originally on slide 2, which is why I call this multiple choice 2, but you know, whatever. Now it's slide 3, but who cares? By going to the computation layer here, nope, I don't want to show that one yet. I'm going to show what came up in the note. So in the note, this is where the message appeared. So if you have them choose an answer and then you want to tell them, yes, this is correct, or no, this is not correct, that text comes from a new note that you give them. So I'm going to go in the computation layer here. All right, so a couple things. Sometimes you end up using multiple slides that have the same question, kind of like how before I started with one slide and then I duplicated it. You want to define a label. All right, so in this case, I'm saying that the student's answer was what they put for multiple choice 2, because what I want to do is I want to say, this is what your answer was, but this is not correct, or this is what your answer was, and this is correct. So I have to tell Desmos, this is what the student's answer was. So their answer comes from multiple choice 2. All right, then from here, I want to give them a message again based on the answer that they chose. But 2 things have to happen. I don't want them to get the message until they actually submit their answer and based on what they chose. So if I just gave them a message based on what they chose, if they don't hit submit, they're going to see if they're right or wrong, and then they can change it. So there's 2 things that are happening. And again, this isn't a note. So in a note, we use content because a specific message is going to come up. So the content that's going to be there is, again, a bunch of when statements. So I'm going to get rid of these little hashtags that gray out the coding. So the content is when their answer, which was multiple choice 2, when their answer was submitted and the answer that they chose was the first one. Again, this is where I got an emoji, so I right-clicked it. You chose 2. This is not an odd number. The number was 11 because it's not divisible by 2. So the reason why I specifically said this is what you chose is because as the teacher, I know that I'm going to disable them to change their answer. So like how I couldn't see 2, 6, 11, or 8 anymore. And I want to know what they chose. The only way I'm going to know it is if I say, you chose this. So then when they submitted it and the answer they selected was the second option, you chose 6, this is not an odd number, and so on and so forth with each of their options. But then for the one that was correct, you submitted your answer, and the answer you selected for this one, it was correct. So yes, you're correct, 11 is an odd number. So then that's the first part, so that's the message that they're getting. But then if they do not be able to change their answer, that's the computation layer that's in the multiple choice note. So here, I'm going to hide it. So I'm going to get rid of this. It's hidden when this is submitted. So I could have said this, or I could have said multiple choice 2. Either one's going to work because we're talking about within this component. So now when I submit something, that's what makes it go away. All right, so are there questions about that?
So the hidden submitted prompt makes the question hide once it's submitted, right?
Correct.
And
so like if I didn't do this in here, so I'm going to get rid of it. When I preview it, if I choose this and then I submit my answer, I'm told if I was correct or not, but this is still there. So if I was wrong, I could go back and I can keep changing my answer until it tells me that I'm right.
okay.
But if I don't want them to be able to change their answer, this component needs to be hidden when a certain thing happened. So I wanted it to be hidden once it was submitted. So the moment they click this submit button, they can no longer change their answer.
Okay.
And you can put anything you want here. So like, let's say you want to do this because you want to do it on an assessment and you don't want them to change the answer. You don't have to tell them if they're right or not. You can just say you chose 8 and then leave it at that. And the reason I would suggest doing that if you do this for an assessment is because if you don't give this part, because of the fact that now the choices are hidden, you as the teacher on this screen, you see what they see. You can't see what happened before something went away. So like if we just said, so if I just said this is wrong, which one did I put that on?
I think the first one, too, yeah.
And just so you're aware, when you go in, if you randomize the answer options, it doesn't get randomized in the coding. The coding goes based on the original thing. The randomizing is just how it appears to kids. So if I choose this and I say this is wrong, you as the teacher will never know that they chose 2. You will just know it's wrong.
Will you still see if they got the answers correct from the dashboard?
Yeah, because right here there's an X, which means they didn't get it correct.
Right.
There's certain things that happen when you do stuff on slides when it comes to the dashboard. So if you didn't attend Javier's session yesterday, I highly suggest you look at the video that he's recording because there are certain things that you have to do just based on what you put on a slide. But so again, I'm going to say you chose 2 because as the teacher, I want to know what they actually chose. So I want to know if everyone did the same thing or if everyone chose different answers. All right, then we went to this final slide with the graph. So do you remember what happened on here?
You were able to draw on it, and then when you clicked the button, the line appeared so you could check your answer.
Mm-hmm. So I could do this. Did you notice anything else that happened?
I think it grayed out the ability to draw more.
Yeah, so when I click this button, it showed me the answer, and now I can't sketch, so I can't change my answer. So this is just another way of doing something in class where you want students to be able to check their work, but you also want to know what they put originally, because if you left them the ability to sketch, there's nothing that stops them from erasing it and changing their answer. Even if it's something that's not like a graded assignment, it still doesn't help you in the way of, you don't know if that's what they came up with originally. So you don't know if a kid did this right the first time, every single time, or if they did it wrong, then they click the button, then they change their answer. All right, so on this one, there are 3 pieces to this. So I have my note in here that's telling them what to do. And so if you didn't attend, I think it was maybe Candace's session yesterday, whenever there's something where you're giving directions, I personally think it's more aesthetically pleasing to put the directions here. Sometimes people put directions in this line, but like you can't bold it up there, you can't enter spaces, you can't do math type. So here's just kind of like a brief idea of what's happening on this slide. Here's where I'm going to put the directions. So we're going to use the sketch screen to graph this line. And then there are 2 things that you needed on there. We needed a sketch and we needed a button, because the button is what controlled something showing. All right, so right now, this is up here as a sketch. And just so you're aware, when you come over here and you do a sketch, you can do a blank background, you can do a graph background, or you can do a custom image where you can upload something. So you're not stuck to one certain thing. All right, so what I know is that the line that they want to sketch is y equals 1/3 x plus 2. So in my sketch, I edited my graph, and I'm going to get rid of this for a second because that's the coding that we're going to be talking about here. Right now, I know that this is the line that they want to graph. So in my graph, I've typed y equals 1/3 x plus 2. Right now, if I preview it, the answer is there because of the coding that I have to do. All right, so what I put in here is I said a bracket, and then I said show, because I only want this to show during a certain moment. I want it to show after they press a button. So I want it to show, honestly, the convention that I'm doing for this, I don't really know if it's 100% necessary. It's just the way that I've learned how to do it by seeing what a bunch of other Desmos people have done. So what I've seen is they have one letter that they're starting the word show, and then I'm going to hit shift in the underscore so I can do it as a subscript. So I'm saying show equals 1, because this is only going to show under a certain condition. So I'm going to show you what that certain condition is. I have a button, and I want the button to say show graph, and I've called this button button 3. So in the computation layer, the only thing that has computation layer is the graph, because I did this and I don't want to add a slider. I want to keep it just like this with a warning symbol, because this warning symbol basically means this is only going to happen at a certain point. It's not always going to happen. All right, so again, the time that I want that line to appear is after I've pressed this button. So in my computation layer, first, I want to define that whole show concept. So that's where this is. I'm going to keep it grayed out, and then I'm going to type it so that you see what's happening. So that show is a number because I said it's going to show equals 1. So 1 is the number that I'm talking about. So when I click N, number automatically pops up. And then this also automatically pops up. The number that I'm talking about is what I called, quote, show. So remember that it was an S, and then everything after that was a subscript. So the way you tell the coding that it's a subscript is I'm going to hit shift underscore, and then what was in the subscript was HOW. So I'm going to do a squiggle bracket and say finish that and finish the squiggle bracket. So that's that number that I defined in the graph. And again, I want it to show when the button has been pressed. So when button 3 is the button dot press count, because this means when button 3 has been pressed, and I'm going to say greater than 0 because that means it's been pressed once. So when button 3 has been pressed, my condition is 1 because I said when show equals 1, that's when that graph is going to appear. And since I said when, that means I have to use otherwise. So I'm going to say otherwise 0. So this means nothing's going to happen. So right now, when I preview this, I'm going to do my graph. Now I'm going to hit show, and now it's showing because I pressed the button. I haven't taken care of this yet. So the way I take care of that is also within the sketch, and that's where I put this up here. Once the button has been pressed, I don't want to be able to see the sketch. So I'm just going to rewrite the code down here so you can see it. So I'm going to disable sketch. So once I try to start typing it, disable sketch automatically pops up. So I'm going to hit enter. And then again, it's going to be disabled once that button has been pressed. So 3.press count is greater than 0. So the sketch is disabled when my button has been pressed more than no time. So once it has been pressed. So now graph it, show graph. Line appears, can't sketch. All right, so I know that might be a lot to take in. Do you have questions on the stuff that I just showed you on this one?
Can you show me that coding one more time, the computation layer for the sketch?
The computation layer and what's in the graph? Or just?
Yeah, that.
Both of them?
Layer.
The computation layer? Okay.
I want to see what you did with that disable sketch one more time. Okay, button 3, press count, great. Okay.
So anytime you're doing anything with a sketch, whether, so like even if you're not doing this part, and all you want to do is disable a sketch, use this, you say, you have to have a button because the button is going to be what controls it. So disable the sketch when the button has been pressed. And we have to give it an amount of time. So once it's been pressed more than no time. So if a kid presses it once, twice, 3 times. On that note, this is why we don't say equals 1. So right now I've disabled the sketch when the press count equals 1. So when the button has been pressed 1 time, because I press it once, it's disabled. but there's nothing that stops a kid from pressing this button again, so I can press it again, and now it's going to come back. So we want to make sure it's any time greater than 0. That way, once a kid presses it once, if you keep pressing it, nothing's going to happen because you said any time more than 0. Are there any other questions on this?
I have a question about the multiple choice one.
Yeah.
On the last slide, if you were doing multiple checkboxes, is the coding about to get a lot more complicated with?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is why I haven't done that yet. That will be for a later session.
Okay. All right.
Because when it comes to the checkboxes, you can't just say when this, like, you can't just say when choice 1 and choice 2 are selected. There's more that goes into it, because if you just say when this is selected and this is selected, you got it right. If a kid chose this, and this, the fact that they chose these two would tell them that they're correct. So there's more that goes into it. So that's for another day.
Okay, yeah.
But that's something I can do on the next one.
I would be interested in that.
All right, any other questions? And okay, on that note, so since Lisa, you're about to sign off because you have class anyway, I'll just kind of wrap this up. While I'm wrapping this up though, I'm going to stop recording.